Yesterday, much of our discussion centered on being effective and empathetic allies. Individuals who use their privilege to help those who do not share their same privilege. People who would fight for education equality for all, just like Zaudin Yousafzai, or challenge ourselves to train beyond our gut reactions and prejudices, as Professor Davies pointed out. We discussed the skills necessary to make a difference, whether that was through learning effective disagreements, focusing on the always essential and often overlooked practice of self-care, examining the intersection between activism and academia, and deconstructing the language that divides our society. We learned about current movements and how we could expand impact while remaining true to our own ideals. We fearlessly challenged speakers, and through a second day packed with opportunities to learn more about each other's passions, strengths, and uncertainties, we learned how to challenge and support one another. Today, we learned how to say goodbye, and how to start to make a real difference, from finding ways to express ourselves even more than two of our keynotes did on the silent disco floor last night, to bringing our passion and our fight to our own careers. Our opening keynote today is a testament to that fight. Tarell Alvin McCraney is an award-winning playwright best known for his acclaimed trilogy, The Brother-Sister Plays, which include The Brother's Sighs, In the Red and Brown Water, and Marcus of The Secret of Sweet. Tarell's script, In Moonlight, Black Boys Look Blue, is the basis for the film Moonlight, directed by Barry Jenkins, which won the award for Best Picture at the 2017 Oscars, with Tarell and Jenkins also winning the Best Adapted Screenplay Oscar. Among its many other honors, the film has won a Golden Globe for Best Drama, Gotham Award for Best Feature, NAACP Image Award for Best Independent Film, the Human Rights Campaign's Visionary Arts Award, and 6 Independent Spirit Awards, including Best Picture and Best Screenplay. Tarell is the recipient of a MacArthur Genius Grant and used his role as a professor of theater and civic engagement at the University of Miami to create a 3-year program in partnership with the university, Miami-Dade County, and the African Heritage Cultural Arts Center. He was recently named a new chairman of the playwriting department at the Yale School of Drama, as well as playwright in residence at Yale Repertory Theater. In an industry clouded by questions of representation and hashtags like Oscars So White, Tarell has used his craft to breathe life into stories of identity, masculinity, and self-discovery. If everyone could please join me in very warmly welcoming Tarell to the stage.
Laptop. It isn't mine, but it's got the time on it, so that's good. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Can you hear me okay? I might get a little louder, so if it gets too loud, just be like, you're hurting me. So the guy upstairs will help us out. Thank you. I'm ruminating on some larger personal political questions, particularly around anti-Blackness and queerness. I think I need you all's input, not you all. This is what I'm writing in the group text to my friends. I write in the group chat on iMessage because this is the amazing way in which we have to have our campfire. Usually you would visit the shaman on the outside of the village, or go to the elders around the campfire, or say, call up mom and dad on the telephone, that antiquated way of talking. But being a kid who never quite trusted organized adulthood, I do what I've always done, which is consult my friends. And my friends are in the group chat. The source of my confusion comes from my feelings as a kid, and so therefore I'm speaking to you, my friends. The best place to sort them out objectively is through your eyes. You all know I was bullied pretty severely in my middle school years while living in Liberty City. Liberty City is a majority Black neighborhood in the landlocked inner city of Miami. Now, how did I steer through this time? Well, art. I focused on imagining I was someone else, someplace else. And this is how I was gotten. There were adults, mostly white, but also Black, who used that trauma to tell me that my community community wasn't for me. They would say and see me in my dire straits of being bullied and warn me that my cohorts didn't understand me, that I was smarter than they were, that I didn't belong there. They pick on you because you're smarter than they are. You're gonna be somebody, and they will never be anything, and that's why they bother you. Fight back until they know that they are nothing. I'm still undoing the fucked upness of this. I knew that there was a lie in what they said, but I was being beaten, bloody, pretty much every day. So I also needed that lie. I needed to feel somehow morally, intellectually superior. They were being cast as animals, and I was being cast as human. This is very anti-black, very anti-community. And this seed got planted deeper and deeper within me every rung of social education that I went through. The wider and more privileged the institution, the more I began to adopt, at least in school, the mores, speech, and patterns of the other students in which I was accustomed to, or becoming accustomed to. Their parents were pop stars, especially in high school, titans of industry. I was in class with the students of BGs. And they became family in a way. They became our own dramatic 90210. But it was exhausting because it was also an education in life skills, a life that told me to disregard who you were when you walked into this place and only bring it out for those rare moments where it could be fetishized. For instance, Tarell, do that thing that y'all do where y'all are from. You know that thing, that girl, do it with your mouth. And I would, like a monkey, perform. This I'm working to undo, or I'm trying to. Always figuring out just how much of this anti-love for my community is left in me, and how far it reaches, and also how the performative nature of my job, of my life, in front of mostly white bodies does a kind of violence. This kind of performance, this show and tell, there's rarely a call and response in it. It's mostly me, standing in front of mostly white, mostly educated, mostly privileged bodies, saying things that I think are interesting, and hearing nothing in return. But I'm used to call and response. If I don't hear a or mm-hmm, or that's right, in the audience, I somehow feel alone. But I learned that mostly privileged white spaces can be silent and deadly, or silent and like you. See? I lived most of my younger years, the wonder years, with my dad in Liberty City. And that's where that kind of bullying happened. But there was a gap of about 3 years where I lived with my mother in Homestead. Homestead is a rural area, mostly. But somehow someone had the bright idea to put the projects there. Projects for us are the housing councils for you, state-funded housing. You know what I'm talking about? Mostly? Cool. Just wanted to check in. Everybody don't have projects. My mother trying to find a way from her addiction, which eventually followed her down there and swallowed her whole again, she gave us residence for 3 years, about from the time I was 9 to 12. When I lived in Homestead, I was bullied there too, but in a different way. I've said this before, but the bullying never actually physically hurt me. I was annoyed by this bullying, and if I really rose up and stood my ground, it would go away. It was somehow surmountable. The boys in this neighborhood mostly bullied me by calling me a faggot, but also by doing things like sneaking into my window at night and putting their hard phalluses on me. When I would wake up, I would be perturbed, never terrified. And as I would scream, they would run off into the night laughing their heads off like clowns. They would sneak up on me and grab my butt and blow kisses at me. They were all my age, and so I never felt threatened, just, again, annoyed. They were also my friends somehow. And I had seen them doing this to others in the community, so one, I felt less alone because it wasn't just me. But two, it then clicked on me who these others were. They were the women and girls were inviting me into a space into my community. A misogynistic, anti-fem space that they had built for women, for young girls at the age of 9. The more they taunted me in this way, the more I slowly started to work myself into this more feminine aperture. At least there was a space, I have started to believe. At least they weren't hurting me, right? The truth be known, I began to like and be aroused by their come-ons. So it was only later in life that I realized that this is the path that is made for so many queer people like me and so many women. I would ended up on the receiving end of all of this aggression and never any affection, never any love, never being spoken to or of. Something about this bullying allowed me to dare, I say, a place in the community. I mean, it wasn't a particularly nice place. So I keep trying to suss this out, these two methodologies of bullying. This having no place in society, where living with my dad felt like there was a life or death conversation, right? Where I was being hit with rocks, where I was being punched in the face, or this bullying with my mom and living with people who clearly had a space for me, except for it was a space that they carved out. Certainly not a fulfilling space. Both these things are a lie, in that the community has more spaces, but the constructs of the people around me didn't allow it to. And here is the third lie, that education was going to somehow better me and pull me out of this oppression. I was confused because my ability to love the shit out of my oppressors made me see the nuance in everything that they did. There were these very kind white people who were offering me education. How could they possibly be leading me to anti-blackness? There were these very rowdy boys who were sexually aroused by me. How could they possibly be leading me to a very bad place? And then there were these oppressed other boys in my neighborhood who really wanted me to die, but it was because someone else wanted them to die. How could they possibly? You see, I kept running down the victim circle over and over again, blaming myself because they didn't see the sameness in me. At the same time, I have to come to terms that there's no magic wand for education, for this nuance, for this knowing. There's no Patronus charm over the wounds caused by the feelings. That's a Harry Potter reference. The wounds caused by feeling other, when without sanctuary, without community, hurt. My education at Yale never made me feel more wanting of Yale, nor does my writing today or the prizes that I get, make me feel more akin to Edward Albee or David Mamet. They don't make me feel like their brotherhood. I still feel like the nigger shouted about in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And I still feel like the black people who are somehow always interestingly left out of Mamet's depictions of big city life. And to be honest, I don't give a fuck. Existing in a white privileged world has had as many violent and caustic encounters as living in my community. The shouts of coon and nigger as I walked home with hands full of groceries in Stratford-upon-Avon. The time a star of my show told me that I didn't understand the nuance of Shakespeare because of my background. Being shouted at for wanting to cut verse from classical work. Having people tell me that my expertise for storytelling didn't quite match up. Having to use stage coaches and managers to give my white colleagues notes because they wouldn't listen to me no matter how many times I've given them to them. I've actually had actors come up to me after and tell me that, oh, I've got this really brilliant note from the voice coach, and then have them recite back to me line for line the coach's notes that I gave to them to give to the actor. This wonderful circular figure. Because I couldn't say it to them. I had said it to them over and over again. But now they've got this bright idea because it came from a white person. The kind of bullying only made me more hungry for my own community, and I grow tired of putting my pain for mostly audiences who can sympathize, not empathize. And as I told you before, when there's no call and response in an audience, it drives me crazy. So for example, I did a piece called Head of Passes, and in Head of Passes, there's this large speech where Sheila, the heroine, is railing to God. And as Felicia Rashad stands out and is railing to God in the middle of the public theater in a mostly white audience, she hears nothing back. And so poor Felicia at that moment really knows that she's the only person who talks to God in this way, except on Sundays. Except on Sundays when the audience becomes mostly black, because the women from Harlem come down from church for the matinee, and she hears when she speaks. She hears, "That's right, sister." She hears, "Go on." And she tells me secretly that this helps her through her speech. But this education, this moving past this gap between access and not, again, it doesn't succor or bring solace to all the anti-black rhetoric. It's as if it's readying us, or me, I always speak for me, for a seat at the table with no knives and forks. There's food, and when I decide to try to eat with my hands, we're being told that we have no manners. I think our conversation has made me understand just a little bit more of this kind of oppression. That we should not be fooled that my community has chosen me either. Still in Liberty City, I am called that fact, making more movies about emasculating the real black man, or being allowed to exist in a world because I'm not that loud faggot. I'm comfortable in myself. So I'm at a crossroads, as I was as a teenager. Do I struggle with the larger racist anti-black community and still be a freak show, an exception to the rule, a kind of dog and pony to show off? Or do I wrestle with my own community to find a space for me? I mostly do the latter, mostly because there I want to find space for other people like me, for the young girls who don't know that they have a choice outside of being in the anti-feminist, misogynist environment. But I also do it for other reasons. There's some lie in that I'm only doing it because I care. I do care. I do. I want to right the wrongs of my community. But there's a lesson in what Tiresias did for Oedipus. He never lived in Thebes. He kind of just rocked up, told them what they needed to know, and went back to his curious place on the periphery of the city. He let them have their prediction with his Promethean knowledge and went back to where he served the community best. Shouldn't my job be to show truth to power and allow my community to judge me or not, but use that information to make decisions, hard decisions about itself? We all want to be loved, though. And I imagine every person who's ever been othered or on the periphery sees the center of community and thinks for a moment, wow, the glow of that hearth looks so warm and comfortable. Wouldn't I rather be there? But then chooses, maybe, to reside in the cold comfort of not. I don't know. I know that I am other. I know that I cannot unchoose that. I know that in not choosing that, I will be left on the periphery. My friend Laura Mavula told me yesterday, or reminded me of a very interesting Baldwin quote. She said, "Remember what Baldwin said, brother. The primary distinction of the artist is that he must actively cultivate the state which most men necessarily most avoid, the state of being alone." I don't know if I can stay alone. Thank you. I love to answer any questions you want. It doesn't have to be about oppression. We cannot talk about bullying. It's early.
It's Sunday.
I came around 8 o'clock and I was like, yeah, you're gonna talk about bullying for an hour. That's real sweet. So, so you don't have to ask questions about that. You can ask questions about anything you want.
Hello.
Hi.
So, first question, what did you read in terms of what response would you like from the audience? Because yes, I was doing that it was inside. So what do you like to hear?
You mean in general or in this audience in particular? Well, in general, yeah, it's necessary for it. I mean, I grew up in the theater, and I mostly respond in the theater. So even in the moments where seeing the film in audiences that were mostly quiet, it's disconcerting, right? Because the live interaction to me is important. It's the point of being there. Is the fact that that's the reason why, if you're an actor or you're a playwright, you create things to be on stage, is to have someone live in the audience responding. Otherwise, you might as well mostly create computer content, which is fine and good and great for other reasons, but the live experience is because of the dialogue you can have with the audience. And when you don't have that, when it's muted and sort of, or it feels unsafe to do that, something feels like it's culturally quieting. And again, I had to learn that there are other spaces that allowed that kind of raucous back and forth in a very productive, juicy way. And then there were places where that was like frowned upon, right? So my students have to get used to saying to me, Tarell, tonight, we don't want you to be yourself at the play. Because if it's something I'm into, even if it's not, I'm not into it, if I hear something that rings true, I'm more than likely going to go, And it's just and my students have gotten used to it by now. They go, God, Tarell's here. Right? So, but it is something to me that I found as a cultural phenomenon. I mean, when I first started working in the UK, I had to gird myself because I was like, I've never quite experienced an audience this quiet. Never. But also that's not necessarily true across the board, because I remember when Director Bird and Debbie Allen brought Cat on the Hot Tin Roof here. And on the West End, again, I had been here for about 2 or 3 years at that point, but on the West End, I had seen many pieces, some pretty raucous pieces, but for some reason, that audience felt okay with talking to this all-black cast all the time, which felt amazing in a West End house. I'd never seen it. Sanaa Lathan came on stage and she says, look how high my body sits on me, Brit. And she drops her dress, and someone in the audience said, damn. And I was like, where are we? So, I mean, I think, I think there's something very limiting, or has been, in terms of, my supervisors often say to me as I'm teaching younger people, teach them about the etiquette of the theater. There's something really unnerving about that word, the etiquette of the theater, because the theater is indeed the live performance. So whatever the performer is asking for, the audience should feel free to give back in a way. Yes? You see? So there's something about it, there's something, again, anti-black about the feeling of not being able to do and express in that way.
Thank you. Good morning. I think you are the luckiest person in this room to talk about oppression only for today, because we have been talking about it for 3 days now. And you are going on again. Well, my question is very simple. How we can expand our struggle against oppression to include other oppressed people around in our communities on the stage? I mean, like disabled people or LGBTQ who are black or something like that. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, the struggle is all-encompassing, right? I think that's the thing that we're starting to learn, is that we kind of can actually see how the movement of what we think of as humanity, the idea, because humanity is a scary word, right? We say humanity as if we all don't naturally have it, as if there's some expansion of this idea that doesn't already sit naturally within us all, right? In some way, shape, or form. The human window encompasses all the things that we know that are true about humanity, that we are capable of quite good and quite bad. sometimes at the same time. And so while encompassing that, we have to be very careful not to exclude the fact that people are more often than not blindly marching towards something that they have been taught rather than something that they innately feel. And so I continue in a very minor, small community way to try to think about those origins, to try to think about the origins of what activities or behaviors we have in our communities. And I think the more we do that kind of cellular work, the more it expands out. I think a larger part of what I found problematic was that I tried to do this on a large, huge scale, going into other people's communities and being like, hey, this oppression that you're doing in this community doesn't work because of X. And then finding that that actually didn't feel like oppression to them. Right? That was an operation of something that felt intuitive and innate to their community. And so I think for me, it's always important to try to connect with our own origin stories. I like to talk about sci-fi stories because sci-fi, there's always some Marvel hero who's got an origin story, right? So Superman's got his little kryptonic key that he can put in the little hole, and then all of a sudden Krypton is around him again. So that synoptic version of ourselves, right? Alex is like, yeah, that's what he's like he's the only person who got it. I appreciate you. I really do. But I feel like we all carry around that sort of codex, or that codex of who we are inside of us. And we're often trying to make people not see it, but in the not seeing it, we actually do harm and damage to some of the more instinctual nurturing and nature that we have. So I keep trying to reconnect to that. I keep trying to reconnect to, and so I'm speaking largely, let me speak anecdotally. So for example, one of the things Barry and I talk about all the time is like, when we were 9, 13, 21, if someone had given us a camera or a canvas to make a film, what would we have done? Right? We didn't have access to these things at the time. What were we thinking at those moments? And the truth is, in those moments, we were constant, at least in my case, I was constantly thinking already that I was going to be an artist, that I needed to train to be an artist, that I needed to learn things outside of my community to be a better artist. And I wish someone had said, hey, little knucklehead, actually everything you need to be a great artist is actually all around you. Because the things that have actually made my work great have nothing to do with the technique that I've learned. They've actually come from the experiences I've had in my own community, right? And so pointing that energy back, I often tell my students, my 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 16-year-old girls, you don't need anything other than what you have right now and the ability to frame it in a way to do great art. There is nothing outside of this community that you need to go and get in order to make good work. And I wish someone had explained that to me before, because I would have picked up some more things, right? I would have stopped spending my time trying to be Brandon Walsh on 90210. So I think those moments of just really trying to connect to those initial impulses, because something told me then that made sense. It's the reason why in my brain, you can literally see it in the way Moonlight is filmed. There's so much of the history of my life captured in these moments. I knew that there were moments that my brain said, capture this. There's something in it for you. You may not know what it is, but there's something in, a drug dealer teaching you how to ride a bike. Capture it, right? Now, how could I have known what that meant? But something told me that the political, spiritual, personal intercession of that moment was something fraught, and that other people would want to commune with that, right? So I feel like finding a way to keep those initial impulses alive is a way that we expand the ability for us to frame what oppression looks like and how we can interact without condescending. Without going to your community and telling your community what it needs. I can say to you, here's how I got back to my initial roots. Maybe it might work for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
You're like, you answered the question 5 minutes ago.
So, I wanted to ask you about movies as a tool to battle this discrimination that exists. And I know that they can be a really good tool. And movies like Moonlight and Hidden Figures, we've been talking about these movies a lot these last couple of days because they have been very eye-opening for a large audience. And what is your impression, though, about Hollywood doing this, being aware of this? Because as a Muslim, I see that Muslims are always represented in certain ways in a lot of the movies that come out. And is there more awareness about this, and are people trying to make more movies that represent all kinds of groups in society?
The easy question is yes. And it happens to do with the accessibility to filmmaking and movie making, right? You know, there's been this debate about the accessibility of camera phones and the way in which the technology has become so accessible. Like you in your hand, and Barry, who is the director of Moonlight, is more astute about talking about this. But in your hand, you have more technological film equipment than, you know, say people did 15, 20 years ago, right? In just your hand. The ability to edit, and on a dime, and make some compelling storytelling, right? I've seen, you know, young people do things on Vine and Instagram that are incredible, touching, gripping, funny, sensual, terrifying moments captured in ways that, you know, we had no access to 10 years ago, 15 years ago, right? So in that way, that kind of content is shifting, right? The Moonlight was made for $1.5 million, which is sort of the lowest budget film to ever win an Academy Award. And so a lot of people were terrified about that, right? Especially in the Hollywood industry, because they're like, wow, if they're making movies for this amount of money and they're winning awards, what are we gonna do? Like, you know, with the $70 million movies that we're making, and that they're not, you know, sort of. And to that paradigm, I have no questions or answers. You know, I'm sort of like, really. You know, this film is an outlier in a lot of ways because again, it was created. The original script was created by a kid who was in mourning, and I literally just wrote it, and Barry picked it up and used his expertise at the time. So there was a nexus or a conflation of just really fortunate events that made this movie happen. Now, that's not the case for all films, right? All films, most films, go through a sort of studio productivity to get made. Now studios are starting to recognize that there is something about tapping into the individual voice that's important, right? Does it happen as often as it needs to? No. But again, you just go back to this notion that the ability to make film and to have it out in the world is actually so much easier now. That we are seeing, again, content. Again, I watched the movie the other night. You know, some random person on Twitter sent a link to another random person, and it just retweeted to me. And I happened to watch this 30-minute film about transgender kids. And it wasn't like a deep meditation. It was just shots of them living life. But it was profound, right? Now, they aren't making any money from that. But the ability to create the work and build that content is out there. And more importantly, getting to your point about how it fights discrimination, is that because the interwebs are mostly free in the Western world, right? Quote unquote Western world, there's an ability to get access to that, right? I didn't have an ability to Google online and look at, like, there are kids who've seen trailers of Moonlight and go, that movie's for me. The ability to get access to the type of film, to the type of content that explores the lives of people who are marginalized is so much more accessible. So that is a good thing. Now, how do we allow them to make that content too? And be a part of that conversation? Because again, if it's just a one-sided way in, then it always says to them they've got to leave that community in order to be a part of that. And that terrifies me in a way. Because then it does a thing where we aggregate all people into these major cities and silos, especially in the United States, we see this often, right? So everybody goes to New York if they want to be an artist. Everybody goes to LA if they want to be a filmmaker. Or everybody goes to Chicago if they want, and there's these hubs of creativity that are drying out. All of these parts of very rich America. If both Barry and myself we grew up 3 blocks away from each other and never really knew each other until we were grown. Both of us were living in different parts of the world and only connected back because we happened to be in town with our families, right? And then I looked around and thought, well, there can't just be 2 of us from this area. There must be more. So then we looked around, and Robert Battle, who's the head of the Alvin and American Dance Company in New York, went to the same center we did, grew up 5 blocks away from us. So that whole community is missing artists who want to engage with and are engaging in other people's communities, but not their own. And I think being able to have access to film and art and dance but also being able to stay where you are or to enrich your own community is very important. And I don't know how we fix that, but it's something we work on.